Hi everyone, and welcome to our fifth show. Today we have got a wicked guest on, and he is from the Labour GRT group, and his name is Luke Smith, and he will be telling us what he's been up to recently, and especially during COVID as well. So Luke, will you let us know what you've been up to, and first of all, who you are as well, so that people can find out all of the amazing work you've been doing so far?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Luke. I am the founder of Labour GRT campaigns. So it's like quite a prolific Twitter page. A lot of people follow us. I didn't expect it to get that big. It's now like 6,000 followers. But the work that I do as part of that really is just educating socialists, educating the Labour Party, even the Social Democrats. I don't care who you are, as long as you're willing to learn about gypsies and travellers and our struggle. To clarify on that, I am from the Romany Gypsy community, so I am invested in this. Although my accent's kind of been, beaten out of me by the education system, and things have changed. I've gone kind of semi-integrated, I guess. I don't fulfil a lot of the stereotypes people think about. So yeah, stereotypes are obviously inherently racist anyway. So. But a lot of the work I do is just educating people. So I'll go and I'll do CLP talks for the Labour Party. I'll attend conferences for charities. I help them develop policy, and I'll talk to Labour councillors or any councillor from any party. I'll even talk to the Tories if that's what it comes to. Like, it's not the most comfortable thing for me in the world, but like, if I feel like that will improve conditions for people on the ground, then that's what I'll do. I've taken part in tutoring programs for gypsy and traveller kids. Just literally everything I could think of, casework, random casework that I probably shouldn't have to do as an individual, but I'm probably not even qualified to do it. But if nobody's going to pick it up, then what choice have I got? So that's a lot of the work I do. I've worked on planning issues, so I've stood up in court in the High Court of England and Wales, and tried to oppose a High Court injunction as well, like things like that, against persons unknown. But when I get to court and I stand up to the judge and be like, we're talking about persons unknown, but we know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about gypsies and travellers. And it's not persons unknown. This is a policy that it's inherently racist and targeted racism within the law. I've done that as well. But yeah, I kind of leave it to you to ask any more questions.
Yeah. So Luke, in terms of where you grew up and stuff, could you give our audience a bit of background of where you grew up and how you grew up as a traveller in our communities?
Yeah, so I actually live in a house, believe it or not. 85% of gypsies and travellers live in houses. So I've moved around, don't get me wrong, but it's not the sort of, I've never really lived on an unauthorised encampment or anything like that. That tends to be people that are probably the most vulnerable people in our community that are doing that. I mean, there's only like 15 to 20,000 people that live like that, whereas there's 300,000 of us in total, so there's quite a lot. So when people are like, oh yeah, you're all criminals and things like that, and it's like, well, if all 300,000 of us were up to no good, this country would look like it would resemble something from The Purge. It wouldn't even look like a functioning state. So that's one of the things I say. But where I grew up in Surrey, and Surrey's one of, I'd probably say, along with the Midlands, the Midlands and some of the North, is probably one of the most racist places against gypsies and travellers. Like, people seem to think that the racists against us are like these bald-headed EDL type members. The racists to us are like judges, people that have gone to like the best schools in the country, people that have gone to Oxford, Cambridge, doctors, lawyers, nurses. So I'm just, like where I live, it's insane. Like, people recognize who you are from your surname. That could affect everything from like your opportunities, economically, so jobs. It affects how you're treated at school. They go, oh, it's another gypsy, like, and they just give up on you instantly, pretty much, which is horrible. So it's like people are like, oh, education's the answer, but at the same time, people are like, oh, they're just gypsies or whatever, or normally they use the P word, but and also there's like in like insane amounts of people using the P word, and just like it's just awful, basically.
Yeah.
But
So in terms of the racism and the stereotypes that you've been discussing, how has that impacted the communities in terms of getting support from the Labour Party and other parties also?
well, I mean, it's like historically, it's been awful. Like you'll get people like David Blunkett who will go and do an article. He was an MP in Sheffield, and he'll go, "Oh, well, I wouldn't want Roma living on my street," and then like talk insanely horribly about Roma. He'll talk badly about gypsies and travellers on unauthorised encampments, even in houses. So like he's not just saying, "Oh, well, if you integrate, you'll be fine." It's no, I don't want to live on the same street as them. It's like complete NIMBYism. So historically, it's been awful. I mean, some of the stuff under Tony Blair's okay in terms of like having gypsy and traveller liaison officers at council level. They're really helpful, and like they save a lot of money as long as you haven't employed racists in those positions, which obviously will inflame things more and make things worse. Those things are useful because that's like those positions are kind of the cross point, where the point of contact between the council and the communities. Like when their kids are at school, they talk about issues of racism, talk about educational issues that they might be having. Budgets have been cut. Special educational needs. We're a community that has a lot of special educational needs because for thousands of years we've done things really differently. So to expect us to come here and over 500 years to just kind of like destroy thousands of years of kind of separate culture and separate upbringing, to just expect us to slot in like we're just like a Lego brick or something, it's just never going to work. So yeah, a lot of us have ADHD, a lot of us have dyslexia, dyspraxia, like all sorts of things. And also like the kind of education we value as a community is often more practical based. It's often more, I always say this to people, it's like we're the first to do apprenticeships. Apprenticeships have only just become cool, but we've been doing them for decades. But nobody, like they weren't okay when we're doing them, but now when everyone else wants to jump on that bandwagon, it's okay. And it's the same with like people who are nomadic or need to work from home sometimes, like at schools. They told us, oh, we could never do this. This is not possible. And then COVID comes along, and all of a sudden, all this material is online. You can access it from home, and so it's just awful in that sense. But I mean, in terms of our day-to-day experience, like it's cradle to grave. Like you'll get to nursery, you'll experience racism even as a kid in nursery, like or whatever. If you go to a nursery, then primary school, it starts there really. And obviously these kids don't even understand racism at that age, so they're obviously just picking it up from listening to their parents go, oh, these dirty people have moved into the area or whatever. And then you go to secondary school and it just gets worse because the kids are now programmed to be properly racist. Now they're not just repeating what their parents say, they're actually being programmed with all those stereotypes in their mind that we're all criminals, or we're going to steal their stuff, or we're dangerous or whatever. It's just nonsense basically. But then so in schools, because that's never really tackled, then those people get to adulthood and it gets worse in adulthood. So then you get to a stage where, you can't go to nightclubs anymore because, bouncers won't let you in. You can't go to pubs even on a Friday. So it's like you've done a hard way that like most of us in this country, genuinely, like a lot of us go, on a Friday, I'm going to go out for a pint, or even if you don't drink, some people go to the pub and just have a Coke or whatever, depending on like your religious beliefs or whatever. But, we haven't been able to do that because pub landlords won't let us in, and they'll blame like an individual who started a fight like 10 years ago and be like, no, we don't serve your kind here. And it's like, but you don't do that to white people that go in Weatherspoons and beat the shit out of each other, do you? Do you know what I mean? Like you don't blame all these white people down the Weatherspoons on a Friday battering each other. Like we shouldn't serve them either. Like you just wouldn't ever say it, but they seem to think that it's okay to apply that to us. So, and it's not just that, it's like cinemas. So like, let's say your kid wants to go to have a birthday party. And, oh yeah, let's go to the cinema or whatever. Like genuinely, when we're with our families, like it's a struggle to actually get let into anywhere. It's kind of like, is there room at the inn? And like, there never is. Like, there's always one excuse or another. Like, some people are genuinely just openly racist, but like, we don't serve your kind here, mate. Like, but others, it's more subtle. It's like, oh no, there's not enough space at the restaurant. It's like, yeah, but there's like 5 tables over there, and the ones that are booked have booked on it. So like, you're literally lying to our faces. And it just says something, right? When the heavyweight champion of the world struggles to go places, right, and gets let in with his family and stuff, that really is saying something. So even if we are the world famous athletes, that's still never good enough for people. Like, it's just incredible, the amount of like, and then
I get what you mean. Like, for me, I think the most notorious hate crime that I've seen towards the travellers and the Gypsy and Romans as well is the Travel 4 documentary. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, mate, because that was absolutely shambolic what happened there. And I'm glad that I took part in making a complaint about this documentary and getting these people into really serious trouble, because what they did was just absolutely shambolic. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that Channel 4 documentary, please, mate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the first time Channel 4's been up to this nonsense. Do you know what I mean? They came out with my Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. Nobody in our communities, right, whether Romany Gypsy or Irish Traveller, barely anyone had ever heard of anything called grabbing. Like, this is not it's not real life. It's just not real life. And also, like, they framed it in an awful way where they'd like, they would basically push people to act in a certain way to fulfill those stereotypes. Right? Like, I know people that were on those shows, some of them, right? They're like, that's not how it was. Like, they've literally misrepresented us. But yeah, I mean, racism and stereotypes and things like that sell. Like, the British press loves it. Like, they love it. Because obviously, they're othering people, and people, especially under this system, what we're living under right now, like, we're huge inequality. People are really struggling to get by. And it's like, well, whenever these sort of gilded ages happen, the first thing they do is attack minorities, right? They go, oh, it's them, they're coming to take your jobs. And it's like, they're sitting there on this massive pot of gold, basically, or all the money, essentially. And, and they're just telling these ordinary working people, or from all communities, by the way. It's not just like white people, but like all communities. We experience racism from all communities, weirdly. But we do get a lot of solidarity also from other minorities, so that's good. But yeah, so it just sells. And dispatches. So there's been My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, then there's Dispatches, the truth about traveller crime. Well, the title's already racist before you even start. Like, the truth about traveller crime, like, it's all, they're making it out like it's our culture to be criminals and things like that. And it's like, well, no, if you actually do the statistics, like, even the sociologists, this is how bad it was, right? Even the criminologist, that was on the show afterwards had to come out and be like, no, like, they've misrepresented this. Like, the only correlation between crime and any sort of background factor is poverty. And that's the reason why we find like young black boys and stuff in jail. That's why we find them alongside Irish travellers and gypsies. And we find like young Pakistani boys, young Bangladeshis. It's like, if there was any sort of truth to the fact that, the truth about traveller crime, like, we're all criminals and all this stereotype and all this nonsense, basically. Truth is, it's the way the state treats us. Because if it was on us, why are all the other minority communities still experiencing the same thing? It just wouldn't make sense from a scientific perspective, from like a logical, thought out, evidence-based approach. You'd just be like, well, this is just nonsense. And they'll just cherry pick statistics. So I did engineering at university, believe it or not. So like, we're taught a bit about statistics and stuff, and it's just like the way they've represented statistics is just completely meaningless. Like, they've plucked, it's not statistics, it's marketing, basically. Like, they're marketing dodgy statistics to people to sell people what they already believe. So they're getting, basically, their core audience is people that are already racist, and this is just the postal stamp on top of it, going, yeah, you were correct to be racist. And that's what they do. They feed off of that. But yeah, Dispatches is normally pretty good on things, but on this, like, they've just got it so wrong. And it leads into worse outcomes. It's not just like, it's not just about crime and the criminal justice system. Like, we're more likely, like, people are like, oh yeah, the police don't that the police don't police us enough. And it's like, no, the reason why we're so much in prison and so represented in the prison system, not just because we're more impoverished community, more deprived, therefore we have higher rates of criminality, along with working class boys as well, right? White working class boys. So it's like, yeah, they're just feeding into this, and like I say, it makes all of our statistics worse, right? It increases the fact that we're less likely to get employed, so that that entrenches further deprivation and poverty. It entrenches the fact that the domestic violence problems and things like that, and it's like, yeah, our community does have domestic violence problems, but so does the white community, so does every other community in this country, and hugely so, because of obviously misogyny is like a massive part of Western culture. Western countries, like the whole system has been propped up for hundreds of years by misogyny and things like that. So yeah, all communities that live here have problems with domestic violence. But when they say, and they're racist, and they say, gypsies, they don't respect women and stuff like that, and it's like, by you saying that, a gypsy or traveller woman who's a victim of domestic violence, and they see somebody at a hostel or like a safe haven for domestic violence victims, and they see you saying this racist, stereotypical nonsense, they're less likely to seek help. So that makes their lives even worse. It's not like these people care about women, like women victims or anything like that. They know that they're making things worse. The fact that people are then racist in school. So when Big Fat Gypsy Wedding and Dispatches come out, massive spikes in hate crime. Massive spikes at schools. People go, you're going to have like a big melon dress or whatever. I don't know what it is. And they'll just say the most nonsensical things like, and also there's this really, it sort of entrenches like Western, a lot of people come along and they try and imprint their Western ideology and their Western system on a culture that has never grown up in the same way and never been treated the same way as like people in this country, like most people in this country. It's like they'll see people getting married young and they'll be like, that's abusive to the women. It's like, has anybody actually asked those girls and those women, if that's what they want or not? It's like, but there's also this thing where it's like it's patronizing, because they'll say it to like young Muslim girls as well. And it's like, so sometimes people want to get married younger, and some people live a long life and have a really great marriage for the rest of their lives, even though they've married young, right? But people come along and use this cookie cutter approach that they've learned from the way they grew up. They see Dispatch and then they completely basically try and imprint their values onto us, but it's like, it's different. Originally, we were matriarchal, actually. Believe it or not, women were like, pretty in terms of like culturally, women are seen as the most important, really. I would say anyway, the way I was brought up. But yeah, people try and kind of use this as a justification for racism, but like I say, these programs are already appealing to racists. It's just to put the stamp of kind of approval on their racist beliefs. Like, they didn't go in and go, is there any truth to rumors about travelers in crime? They didn't go like that, and they didn't have a title that was analyzing that. The title was already aiming at the answer before you even start. The truth about traveler crime. It's implying that there is a truth to traveler crime before we've even started, and they've not gone, actually, there is some crime in the traveller community, and the gypsy community. And the reason for this is because they've been left behind socially, they've been left behind economically, they've been left behind in the criminal justice system, they've been left behind politically, like all these things. And it's like, let's do that, Dispatches. Like, I will happily come on a show, like if they do another Dispatches or whatever, well, not with the same people that run it, obviously, let's get different people, but I would happily go on a show like that, and I'd happily talk about all the sociological reasons for why there is some crime in our community and things like that. And it's like, and also under the current status quo, when we've got people trying to criminalize trespass, what they're trying to do is criminalize a form of homelessness. And it's like, if you're homeless and you don't have any money to get a house or live somewhere else, then you're being made into a criminal. The laws are changing around you to make you criminal. It's not that you were criminal in the beginning. People seem to forget that. Like, we've had this for hundreds of years. It's not that when we first came to this country 500 years ago, and then a bit later for a lot of Irish travellers, it's not that when we first came here we were engaging in criminal activity. It's that the state has imposed, the law has come in encroaching on us. We've not come encroaching on the law. But obviously typical crime, like I say, it's only related to poverty and deprivation. But the people at dispatches, the real clever big brains at dispatches, they don't want to talk about that. It doesn't fill their narrative. It doesn't fill their boots of racism.
Exactly, it doesn't make them more money, does it? So coming back to the encampments and that, what campaigns have you got currently going on? Can you let the world know what's been going down with you lately, please?
Yeah, so what's been going down with me is that I'm trying to get Labour politicians to actually stand up and say, we care about human rights. Sometimes standing up for human rights is electorally unpopular. But at the same time, if you're too much of a coward to stand up for human rights, you shouldn't be a Labour politician in the first place. And you certainly shouldn't be leader of the Labour Party. You shouldn't be leader of a union or anything like that, because at the end of the day, we're people too. We're part of the electorate. We have a vote. So why don't you care about us? What's different about us, to your family? Why do you care about your mum's vote and not my mum's vote? My mum has issues with the society that we live in, like and my sisters have have to go into the economic system. So same with me, right? So a lot of these people come along and they go, oh yeah, well, why can't you just integrate and things like that? And it's like, and why can't you just follow by these rules and stuff like that? And I'm like, well, let's take you at your best. Let's say some of the stuff you're saying is true, right? Let's say it's true. What you're asking me to do is follow your rules, but you don't want to follow your rules. You want to come to me and say, oh yeah, no racism and things like that, and yet your police officers will come to a pub, and a pub landlord will refuse us entry, and they go, oh no, it's totally legal to refuse entry. Well, ask them why they've refused entry. Oh, because they're gypsy travelers. That's racism. You're not enforcing the law. So we're actually more likely to be victims of crime, believe it or not, than actually be perpetrators of crime. Now, that is just like an insane statistic for me. And that comes from like Runnymede Trust, like all these different organizations that have done this, like with massive victims of hate crime. Like the other day, somebody sprayed like dirty gypsy and stuff on the side of someone's trailer and caravan the other day. So things like that are really common. Look, society expects us to fulfill our side of the bargain, but society doesn't want to fulfill its side of the bargain. So let's talk about unauthorized encampments, for example, right? Yeah. So I come along talking to Labour politicians and politicians of all kind of stripes as well, from all different communities, and they'll say to me, "Oh yeah, why can't they just live on a normal site?" Well, then I go, "Well, there's a massive shortage of permanent sites, and there's even bigger shortage of transit sites. So these people have nowhere to go, so they formed an unauthorized encampment." And they go, "Oh yeah, but they leave rubbish. That's my problem." And then I'll sit there and say to them, I say, "Okay, they leave rubbish, so get the council to provide them bins." And they sit there and go, no, but they don't pay council tax. And then I have a really good comeback to that, and I say, okay, we'll give them somewhere to live. Like you don't even have to give them somewhere to live. A lot of gypsy and travellers even buy their own land to live on, and people will reject planning permission and things like that. And then people go, yeah, but why can't they live on the sites that are already approved? And it's like, well, I've just told you there's a massive shortage of sites, and I've just told you there's even worse situation for transit sites because people like you came along and decided to sell all our historical stopping places. And there's a book by Damien Labasse, by the way, called Stopping Place, and it's about all these places, where we'd stopped for hundreds of years. So I did a meeting with a Labour CRP up in the northeast. Yeah, just making sure. Never eat shredded wheat. No. So I just did a meeting with them, and they were talking about Appleby Fair. And they were like, "Oh yeah, but there's unauthorised encampments." I was like, "Okay, well, where did those people stop for the last 200 years then?" "Oh, well, they've been closed off and sold or whatever." And I'm just like, well, you're telling me that you've closed them off and you've not replaced those places for those people to stop. So that's a big problem. And it's like, and then they go, well, why can't they solve it themselves in the planning system? And then you talk about the planning system. And you're like, yeah, but the planning system is inherently racist. Like I'll tell you now that, I think it's 90% of our planning applications get rejected compared to 15% of the ordinary for the rest of the population. So that, like, that's ridiculously different planning outcomes. And then when we do get passed, we get people come up and appeal it and say, oh yeah, well we don't want them here, and then come up with all this NIMBYism. And it's like, well, if you don't want rubbish, supply them with means of disposal. If you want them to pay council tax, approve permanent sites and they'll be paying council tax, or approve transit sites and they'll be paying ground rent. Like, it's just so simple, but people don't see the circular logic. And it's like, and I'm like, and then they'll come to the last thing and they'll be like, oh yeah, but we just don't want them in our area. And I'm like, okay, well, what you're telling me now is that they're not the problem, you're the problem. Because you're complaining about all these issues, but you've just outlined that you're the cause of all of this because you don't want them to have anywhere to live. And there's three, like I talk to like a lot of charities, right? And I talked to this Jewish one, a Jewish like human rights organizer called Renee Kassin. They're really great. Their work on Gypsy and Travelers, and it's second to none apart from that actual Gypsy and Traveller chat. Like, these people are unbelievable. The people that work there, and they talk about this like pyramid of hate and stuff like this. It's like, we're climbing up that pyramid of hate now. It used to be, kind of bigotry, low-level slurs. Like, we've always had bigotry and like racism, but it's getting worse again. And we're climbing up that pyramid of hate now that the state is legalizing pogroms against us. And then the Labour Party is just going to sit there and go, yeah, but it's electorally, not very good. So we're just not going to stand up for them. And it's like, well, you're an organization. You're meant to be socialist. How could you be socialist, right, if your socialism doesn't include minorities? That's not being a socialist. Like, yeah, and it's just a form of cowardice that I just have no time for. And there will be some Labour MPs that will stand up for us, and it's not from left or right, by the way. I'm hoping that Kate Green, everyone from Kate Green to Zara Sultana to hopefully a few more, Nadia Whittam, hopefully, fingers crossed, these people will stand up and go, well, this isn't quite right. Electoralism is important, right? And I understand that we have to win. And I'm not saying that you have to go around all these council put up at your town hall a big Roma flag. I don't want you to do that. I'd much rather you be more subtle about your support for us and actually get us planning permission and actually explain to planning inspectors our needs. Actually get us material things. If you want to stop unauthorized encampments, don't criminalize it. We're already criminalized enough. You've incarcerated enough of us. We don't need to be incarcerated anymore. And people like Keir Starmer come along, and their only approach is just criminalize people more because that'll make all the problems go away. Criminalizing people makes problems worse. It means that those kids are going to lose their parents to the criminal justice system. Their kids are going to grow up without parents, potentially in care. The crime rates of people in care are terrible. So what you're saying is you want to basically make the problem worse. That's not logical. So yeah, I just sit there having to explain myself over and over again. And don't come to me and say you're interested in human rights if you're not going to stand up for everybody, because that's not interested in human rights. That's being selective, right? I can't be dealing with that.
Yeah, exactly. You're spot on there, mate. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous, them picking and choosing which minorities to back and support, to be honest. And we've seen it consistently throughout this, even before this pandemic, to be honest, that the GRT community are left to the sidelines and left fending for themselves. So this is what I'm going to bring it up now about education and the lack of GRT education in schools and secondary schools as well. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. What do you feel needs to be put onto the curriculum about the GRT community?
Well, look, for one, in education, let's give access to, equal access to opportunities. That's number one. So apprenticeships, don't have your shadow minister for, lifelong learning and apprenticeships come out and basically release a leaflet that basically indicates that we're all some sort of criminal extorters, right? That's a problem. People in that community aren't going to give us apprenticeships anymore. Teachers won't want to teach us. That's what that sort of racism leads into. So for one, make sure that you're doing right by us, because the thing is, we're the community that needs lifelong learning the most. A lot of us learn later in life. Like, we leave school with no qualification because we have to work, by the way, because nobody else will give our families economic opportunity. Self-employed, we can barely get enough self-employed opportunity as it is, because people go, oh yeah, and by the way, you want to do a roof. Oh, are you a Gypsy traveller? No, because we don't employ those here. So it's already bad enough as it is, right? And then these people make it worse. It's like, we need we need access to proper, so when they're doing official apprenticeships, right, when they're releasing people's kids to go bricklaying and stuff at 15 and 16, why can't you release kids to their family businesses? Because at the end of the day, that's where they want to work. Why could you do an apprenticeship for a multinational corporation that doesn't pay its corporation tax, but a local gypsy and traveller family who pays their tax, by the way, have a limited company? Why can't you release apprentices to them? Like, we've been doing apprenticeships before you even thought of them. So that's one thing that you can do. Second thing is that educate people about the use of the P word and the K word, right? Say that it's not okay. And teach people about actual gypsy and traveller history. Our story is one of the most vibrant struggles of survival that the world's ever seen. We've traveled all the way from India, right? We've picked up languages on the way. We've integrated on the way. We've got, unbelievable skills. Like, we still have like metal workers to this day that are like unbelievable. We have craftspeople that are unbelievable, because, we spent thousands of years doing things with our hands and making things. Things like that, and like horses, like the fact that we can rear horses, like our knowledge on horses is like world renowned. Like the amount of people that work in horse racing or work in show jumping, like all these sports, equestrian sports that you'd think were for like rich white people or whatever. Loads of gypsies and travellers are involved in those sort of things, and half of them are too scared to say that they're from our community. But their knowledge on like animals and things is next level. But teach about our history. So just and like there's this big kind of whitewashing of history. Like they'll talk about the Normans and people like that, but they'll never talk about nomadic communities. And it's not just our community; it's like communities around the world. Nobody wants to talk about like the Mongols or gypsies and travellers, or even the Celts at one point. Loads of communities at one point or another have been nomadic. So why do we have this idea? Why do we teach our kids that everybody's been in like a stationary in a house and things like that for thousands of years? Like, that's not the case. For 99% of human history, we've been a nomadic as a species. And in Africa and places like that, we still have herders and things. And like in Afghanistan, like we still have people that are nomadic. So why aren't we learning about this? That's for one. So we need to actually teach proper history. There's a guy on Twitter that does like decolonize the curriculum. Yes, definitely. And it's not just for our community, it's for every other community. So that's another thing. Teach people why, when we first came here, we came with massively skilled workers, metal workers, blacksmiths, all sorts of things, merchants, like massively important things, and going to communities that weren't always reached by cities and things like that. So that's why our nomadic life actually suited the country at that stage. And then we get Henry VIII come along with all his racism. This is how ingrained like here. And I'll get people come to me and go, yeah, but you're white or something. I'll sit there and be like, oh, okay, but I'm not bothered about that. Like that doesn't, but at the same time, it doesn't matter whether you're white. If you're being discriminated against, like, it's still discrimination, right? Like, you can't not care about it. It's like a bit like anti-Semitism. Like, just because people might present white or whatever, like a lot of Roba don't even present white. Like, our community is originally from India. There are a lot of people that come from Eastern European countries where their communities have been even more cut off, and they haven't mixed with other nomadic communities, like Irish travellers, for example. Like Tyson Fury, for example. I think he's a mix, personally. I think he's a mix of gypsies and Irish traveller. But what I'm saying is that those people, like, you wouldn't call them white. There are even some English Romani that you wouldn't even think were white, genuinely. So it's like, it's not even about that. Like, and racism isn't about this weird notion of races that some racist biologist came up with 200 years ago to justify his own nonsense, right? Racism, like, if somebody, has these stereotypes about you, has these things and hates you, disrespects you, then that is racism, whether or not you're considered a race or not, right? It's what the racists think you are is what makes it racist. It's not who you actually are. So that's what I'd say to people. So that's interesting. But in schools, we just need a better kind of grab on history, really.
I feel that
for one thing, nobody talks about like Roma slavery. Like, throughout our history, not even in just Romania, which ended in 1856, I think, but even across Europe, in Catholic nations all across the West, right? Romanies were enslaved. So
yeah, so I feel like something that's been coming up during the lockdown is the fact that during the Second World War, 500,000 to up to 1.5 million GRT people were actually killed, and it's never ever brought up during these times, during Remembrance Days and things like that. It's just never brought up. I didn't actually find this out until the lockdown, so I just wanted to find out your thoughts. Is this something that you've been campaigning on as well, about bringing up the fact that the GRT community were pretty much involved in the Second World War?
Well, it's just awful, isn't it? Like, you have Holocaust remembrance, and then somebody from my community will have to stand next to a Labour politician that's been, basically guilty of racism in the past. So, like half the time, we don't even feel welcome at Holocaust memorial events, and like genuinely, like I get so much solidarity from the Jewish community, genuinely, right? And they support me. They support, loads of other, campaigners and things like that, right? I cannot thank them enough, right? A lot of Jewish campaigners, that is, and a lot of Jewish charities and things like that. But there are some Holocaust events that we're made to feel unwelcome at, and that's obviously awful, because it's like, I mean, there's this awful thing, right? In Germany in the 80s, I think they only recognised the Holocaust to Roma and Gypsies in like 1980. Before, they were basically coming along going, yeah, but they weren't killed because of their race, were they? They were killed because they were criminals. And like, when you listen to that, now listen to Priti Patel's interview with the Board of Deputies, you can see a direct comparison between the way the German state has treated us, but historically, and what Priti Patel's saying about, unauthorized encampments bring criminality and all this stuff, right? There is actually a direct comparison to that. And I think that's why we get like a lot of support from Jewish people in this country, because they're sitting there going, what the hell is going on? Like, you can't say these things. And obviously the Home Office actually does quite a lot for the Jewish community. I actually learned this. Like, obviously the Jewish community are targeted by like anti-Semitic like violence and things like that, and that's why they need like support from the Home Office to provide their kids security when they're at school, which I just found that insane. Like, the fact that even happens is like incredible. It's just ridiculous. But so they're actually in between a rock and a hard place, because if they challenge Priti Patel too much, she could just be like, oh well, we're withdrawing your funding for security and things like that. And I only really found out about this recently. But yeah, we get so much support from there, but at the same time, we should be recognised within the Holocaust remembrance, and we shouldn't be whitewashed out of history. And like, obviously, Jewish people lost, a lot of people in the Holocaust. Like, the majority of people, that were lost were Jewish. Like, a lot of majority of the victims, but nobody talks about Joseph Mengele experimenting on Gypsy twins. And subjecting them to horrific experimentation. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about, our experience of places like Auschwitz, our experiences in places like the Warsaw Ghetto and things like that. Nobody wants to talk about it. So we've just been written out of history. Nobody even wants to talk about, the laws. When we learn about the Tudors, right? Here's an easy thing, right? You don't even have to have a specialist lesson. You could come along and go, I'm teaching our kids today about the Tudors. We're going to talk about a migration of a community that came here during the Tudor times, and then the laws were enacted to criminalize that community, like the Egyptians Act of 1530. Nobody learns about that. And I think that's a really important legislation to learn about.
Yeah.
Not just for our community, but it actually teaches you how the state treats minorities. And it actually has really big parallels with what Priti Patel's trying to do now, which is strip our assets. So take our trailers, take our vans, our trucks, to pay for this thing called cleanup, which, by the way, the state should be doing anyway, because they should be providing us places to live. But that's back into the previous discussion. It's all cyclical. It's all linked together. But that's basically, that's a pogrom. What you're talking about is legalizing a pogrom, putting our kids into care. And nobody wants to talk about, like for example, in Ireland, like, there's been a big thing talking about, like, basically the nunneries that were taking kids away and like murdering children, like awful stuff, right? But in this country, there's never been like a reckoning around forced adoption for gypsies and Irish travellers. which has been a massive deal. Like, I sat there with a mum who it was her niece, right? But she's obviously taking the responsibility of her niece now, because social services intervened, took the kid off for the dad, and all her family put themselves forward to take that child. And instead, they ended up putting that kid with a racist, normal family who used the P word and things like that. So that kid was put with a family that's completely unsuitable for her, even though none of that family have criminal records or anything like that. And they completely overlooked her deliberately and put her with a normal family to forcibly integrate us. That's what states do. But nobody wants to talk about that. Social services don't want to have that conversation. Social workers often don't want to have. I mean, there's a lot of social work going on in the social worker space now, which is super good. So people who are doing that, you're really good, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. So,
thanks, Luke. And I guess how do the GRT community identify? So obviously, the word BAME. Do you class yourself as BAME?
well, does anybody class themselves as BAME? Yeah, I talk to like black people all the time. I talk to Asian people. I talk to like Indians, Pakistan. I'm like, do you class yourself as BAME? And they'll be like, no, not really, because we have different issues. Like, a lot of our stuff is shared, right? The whole criminal justice system, the way police treat us, all this stuff is shared. But nobody's BAME. It's a bit like where GRT comes from, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller, right? They're three different groups. They've been merged into one for, the comfort and privilege of some white civil servant. A middle-class white man, because he can't be asked to do the proper research. That's the truth of BAME, and that's the truth of GRT, right? So no, I identify as a British Romany Gypsy. That's how I identify. But yeah, we are a minority. We do experience discrimination. We do experience all these other things, and we do have a different culture. But that's fine. In a properly functioning democracy, other cultures can exist side by side, but the truth is we don't live in a properly functioning democracy. We live in what's closer to, really, when you look at these levels of inequality and things like that, we live in an oligarchy, and the only way they can keep their power is by saying to minorities, hey, they'll say to like the black community, oh, it's the Gypsies and Travellers that are coming for your stuff. They'll say to the Jewish people, it's the black community coming for you, or whatever. They'll just play us all off of each other. And that's the only use I see for BAME, really, is that we should really build solidarity between different communities. But this idea of BAME in terms of like, oh, the statistics and the civil service nonsense that they come out with, like, no, I'm not for that. And I don't think anyone I've spoken to is for it, apart from the white statisticians or whoever they are, or the people that make the policy, which tend to be white people. Then yeah, they're the only people that use it. So I wouldn't class, but at the same time, I wouldn't class myself as like black. Obviously, we're not black. Like, you can see that we like we said, we have different problems. Like, I talk in a different way now, just because like the education system's like beating it out of me, basically, which is awful, which is traumatic in itself. The fact that you have to code switch. So when I talk to my family and when I talk to other people, I talk in a completely different way. Often, well, a lot of the time, like we speak a different language even. Like, a lot of the time, most people wouldn't be able to understand us. So, so yeah, but yeah, we're minorities, but yeah, that's it really. We're not BAME.
Thank you for confirming this, Luke. And so, moving forward, what are your plans, and what group will you be working with in terms of supporting the, the GRT community?
Literally, I work with any group, right, that has got, they're anti-racist, and they care about human rights. I work with anyone. So, I've done Labour, Black Socialists, Socialists of Colour. I've worked with, I even talked to like Jewish Labour movement. I've talked to literally everybody who cares about equality, basic human rights, right? Believe it or not, like I've talked to charities from other communities, like I said, Renee Cassin. I've talked to people from the board of I've talked to people from the board of deputies, right? And they're helping me educate people, not just like, not just like conservative people or Labour people, but they'll talk to people in their own community, and like, I've talked to left-wing like more left-wing Jewish groups as well. Look, as long as the groups aren't controversial and they don't have people that are suspended or whatever it is, I'll work with anyone. I'll talk to anyone. I will educate anybody, because that's what I'm here to do. And I say to Labour politicians, like, you want to reach out to me anytime, or anybody who's a Labour Party member or councillor or anything, reach out to me anytime. If you've got any questions, I said, like, no matter how stupid it is, no matter how racist you might think it might come across or whatever, just talk to me. I've had people come in Labour CLP meetings that I've done and educated people, and I've gone through and tackled the big stereotypes that they come out with, and I'm fine to do that. Like, I've developed a very thick skin, like I say, we're bullied from cradle to grave. We're treated like absolute crap, basically. So I'm immune to it now. So if you've got any questions, no matter how stupid it is, I will answer them and I'll tell you a solution. That's the thing. People are like, oh yeah, the Gypsy and Traveller community, they expect it all from our side, but they don't give anything. It's like, well, I've been here for 5 years. I've been doing the work for 5 years. Where have you been? Do you know what I mean? So, and there's been hundreds of people like me, by the way, over the years. There's been Gypsy and Traveller journalists. There's been people in the trade unions even. So there's no excuse for this idea that, that we're not doing our part in society, because I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part right, and you still don't want to listen to me. So yeah, come ask me questions. If you want like policy advice or anything like that, look, I'm only qualified up to a certain extent, but I can give you my experience of things as somebody who's gone through education, had family that leaves school early and things like that, and I've been all the way through education. I've got an engineering degree. I'm a software engineer now. I've been a chemical engineer previously. You know what I mean? Like, if you can't talk to me and you can't, kind of bridge that gap, because, if you're terrified of me, I think that says more about you than it says about my community. So we're here. We're always going to be here. When Keir Starmer decides that actually does stand for human rights, he's got my email address. He knows the Twitter account. People within the Labour Party know who we are. So yeah, come for us. We're waiting. That's what I would say.
Exactly that, mate. Well, you heard that, Keir Starmer. Luke Smith is absolutely waiting for you to come and talk to him when you're actually ready to come and fight human rights. But only when you're ready, though. Don't come anytime before, please. But anyway, Luke, thank you for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and just hearing about your experiences and the campaign work that you've been up to. So we'll definitely be asking you to come back on again. And we will obviously keep in touch and keep working together. And like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. And if you have any final thoughts, then let us hear it before you go.
So my final thoughts is this, right? So I'm a socialist, right? I'm in the Labour Party. I'm a socialist. I believe in human rights, right? I care about I care about tackling anti-Semitism. I care about rights for the Jewish community. I care about rights for LGBT people, including trans people. I care about the Black community. I care about what they go through and have to deal with all the time, right? And you'll see on the page, we're always campaigning for other communities. I care about Indian, Pakistani community. I care about every single minority in this country, right? So if you can't say the same and you're in the Labour Party, you're not a socialist. You're not even a social democrat. You're nothing. You're a charlatan, right? So any groups that need my help, want me to support their campaigns, anything like that, from any community, right? I'm there for you, basically, and I'll support you all the way. I don't want to take your voice and talk over you or whatever. I just want to be there and say that, I personally have your back. And I think everybody should be like that to every community. So all those people in the Labour Party that aren't doing that currently, from left to right, you aren't real socialists. So you need to get on it, really.
Thank you, Luke, for saying that, because that's literally facts. If you're not fighting for all minority groups, then you can't really be calling yourself a socialist. So thank you again, Luke, and we will definitely be having you back on again to catch up with you to find out what campaign and stuff you've been up to. So thanks again, and you know what, go and enjoy that lunch. You've got about 10 minutes left, mate. That's not good. So
that's all right. I eat social justice. You know what I mean? I can survive off of that. That's enough nourishment for me. Right. Anyway, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Right, so now I'm going to pass over to Akua, who is going to let us know what's been going on with the LBS campaign strike. Over to you, Akua.
Hi, Andrea. Oh my goodness, so good to sit in listening to Luke and what he's saying about that community, and so important in terms of the campaign for an actively anti-racist Labour Party. Exactly that. If people aren't actively anti-racist and dealing and looking at those issues of those communities, then they cannot call themselves socialists, and they shouldn't be in the Labour Party. And it would be really good for us to look at working more closely with that community around things like motions and stuff that we're doing. And that's what I'm going to focus on, looking at our social media. But I'm going to actually start, I think, so we've done some posts to raise an awareness around the fact that Luke was coming on and Labour Gypsy Roma Travellers. So this is some of the posts that we've shared from his Twitter account, which has got an absolute mine of information, really important information about the history and culture of ethnic Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities, and about the campaigns that he's leading on. And this is the logo for people to look out for when they're looking for the work that he and his comrades are doing. So there's some really specific statements he's making. People do this whole romanticization. I mean, I grew up, interestingly, when he's talking about that whole process of children being taken out of communities. I was transracially adopted, grew up in Northamptonshire, and actually, what it was common speech. The sort of anti-gypsy speech was just common. It was just in the playground. It was from the teachers. It was in in the shops, everywhere. That was the norm. And as a very isolated young black woman, I identified with that and was really aware of that oppression. But also on the flip side is this sort of romanticization, but then don't actually really want to deal with reality. So these are some of the posts from his social media. I'm just seeing if I can get into, because then I really wanted to show and share where we're up to with the campaigning. Moving us from one side, and I should be able to click back. So it's really useful. So the things are mounting up, things are happening out there in terms of the processes through the Labour Party. So I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the. I'm constantly having to move us around off screen. Some of the CLPs and branches that are pushing our motion through. And I think it would be really good for us. And one of the things we could maybe do in solidarity with Labour GRT is look at what motions could be pushed through the Labour Party, through to our CLPs, through to the conference to actually look at policy on this. So this was great to see Harrow West CLP members pass our motion on Wednesday. So that would have been last week. That's great. The same in Manchester Central CLP, which is where I'm up near, but Ardwick isn't my branch. And in Croydon North CLP with Bensham Manor. Really great. I mean, these are just samples that we're just putting out on social media. That's on our Twitter account, our Facebook account. And then I just thought it would be useful. It's there if people want to do it. We're encouraging people to see the motion and to adapt it. What we're saying, we recommend that comrades adapt this motion to their local conditions. And we're here to support. So if there are members out there who want to look at pushing the motion through their branch and through their CLP, get in touch with us. We can support around the arguments that people might have, how to tackle them, how to actually raise it, how to do this whole thing about that this is a really important part of building a truly socialist Labour Party, and in that case, building democracy in the country. And that really is, I think, we'll cover what we're doing in social media. I did want to bring up the Facebook, so just look at how the campaign's going, and particularly, I know you like to know how the program's going out, what the responses are being. So this is a slightly different view. Are you able to see that, the Facebook?
Yeah.
So what I found was really interesting is so this is from last week's show, the number of different sites that have been pushing it out, because obviously we expect it on Socialist Telly, we expect it on the Squawk Box, but also UK Against Racism have posted the video. Tory Fibs have Vote Love Not Hate, Wear Red. It is the green benches. It's really important. Labour Rebuttal. It's really important to see how widely this show is getting. And if we start adding up the numbers, I can't do it. We'll have to get Socialist Telly to do the stats on that one. But you know, you start adding them up. We're reaching thousands of people. It's amazing, and such important responses. I'm going to stop that share now.
Okay, thank you for the update, Akuwa, and we will catch up next week to see what's been going on further. So hopefully we'll get some more motions passed, but I know that meetings are going to be stopping in London anyway from the March the 12th. So after then, we'll be able to start doing it again from May. So hopefully we may even see some more motions going in from then as well. So yeah, the campaign's looking good and it's going great. So yeah, we'll give you more of an update next week. Thank you for joining us.